My name is Olivia, and I'm 32 years old. 2 days ago, my mother called to tell me she was taking out a $50,000 loan against the house I bought to keep my parents from going homeless. She needed the money to bail my 34-year-old brother out of his third car crash. When I told her she legally could not touch that property, she laughed and said she had already submitted the paperwork. She forgot that I am a commercial real estate underwriter. And she forgot that I get automatic alerts the second someone tries to forge my signature on a federal bank document. Before I take you into the phone call that ended my family, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday evening 16 years ago. That specific Tuesday is the answer I give when people ask me where this all started. Tyler failed his driving test 3 times. My parents bought a vanilla sheet cake from the grocery store and tied Mylar balloons to the dining chairs for every single failure. They sat around the table telling him the instructor was unfair and the test was rigged. They celebrated his effort. When I turned 16, I took my test on a Tuesday afternoon. I passed on my first try without a single deduction. I walked into the house holding my temporary paper license. The kitchen was empty. The lights were turned off. My parents had taken Tyler out to dinner to cheer him up after a bad day at his part-time job. I made myself a sandwich and ate it, standing at the dark kitchen counter. 16 years later, the pattern had not changed. It just got more expensive. It was a Tuesday in July. The Phoenix heat was sitting at 114 degrees outside my office window. I was at my desk reviewing a commercial zoning file when my cell phone vibrated against the wood. It was my mother. I answered and kept my eyes on my monitor. "Your brother is in trouble," she said. Her voice was sharp, moving straight past a greeting into a demand. Tyler rented a Tesla for a weekend trip to Vegas. He ran it straight into a concrete light pole in a hotel parking lot. It was his third time destroying a vehicle in 4 years. He did not purchase the rental insurance. "We need $8,000 wired to his lawyer by 4 this afternoon," she said. "It is for the retainer to settle the damages before the rental company presses charges." I stopped scrolling through my document. I pushed my keyboard away and leaned back in my chair. "Mom, I am not wiring Tyler $8,000 for wrecking a rental car. He is 34 years old. He needs to call the rental company and set up a payment plan." There was a 3-second pause on the line. I could hear the television running in the background at their house. Then her tone shifted from demanding to cold. "Fine," she said. "If you want to turn your back on your own flesh and blood, your father and I will handle it. We will just pull a home equity line of credit on the Scottsdale house. We are taking care of family." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue or beg her to see reason. I just let the silence hang on the line. 8 years ago, my parents declared bankruptcy. The bank was 60 days away from foreclosing on that exact Scottsdale house. I was 24 years old. I drained my entire savings account and bought the property outright from the bank to keep them off the street. I let them live there rent-free. Tyler eventually moved back into the guest room because he could not hold down a lease. For 8 years, they lived there and treated the property like their own asset. They painted the walls, planted a garden, and acted like they held the cards. "You cannot pull a line of credit on that house, Mom," I said. My voice was entirely flat. "Watch me," she replied, and ended the call. I set my phone face down on my desk. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady. I was not worried about them taking a loan because they could not pull a single dollar from that property. The only name on the warranty deed was mine. 10 minutes later, my phone screen lit up. It was an automated email from the local credit union where my parents banked. I opened the message. Subject line: "Action required. Home equity line of credit application received." Someone had just walked into a bank branch and signed my name. The next morning started exactly like every other Wednesday. I woke up at 6, I brewed black coffee. I dressed in a tailored navy blazer and drove down Camelback Road. The Arizona sun was already baking the asphalt, but the inside of my car was a controlled 70 degrees. I did not drive to my office. I drove straight to the Desert Financial Credit Union. I walked through the glass double doors at 8:15. The lobby smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale printer ink. I approached the front desk and asked to speak with the branch manager. I provided my driver license and my social security number. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a windowless office across from a man named Greg. He wore a slightly wrinkled gray suit and had the tired eyes of someone who processed consumer debt all day long. I need to see the physical paperwork for the home equity line of credit application submitted yesterday against the property on Oak Street, I said. Greg pulled up my file on his monitor. He frowned. He clicked his mouse a few times and then looked back at me. He explained that the application was submitted in person just before closing time the previous day. He printed the scanned document from his network and slid it across the laminated desk. I picked up the 3-page application. I did not rush. I read every single line with the exact same scrutiny I applied to my corporate clients. The borrower was listed as Olivia. The collateral was my Scottsdale house. The requested draw amount was $50,000. The stated purpose of the loan was home renovations. That was a lie. The purpose of the loan was to pay off a rental car company before they filed a police report against a 34-year-old man who could not drive. I turned to the final page. My eyes dropped to the bottom right corner. There it was, my signature, or rather, an attempt at my signature. The loops were too wide. The pressure of the pen was uneven. It slanted slightly upward at the end. It was the exact handwriting my mother used when she wrote out grocery lists or birthday cards. She had walked into this bank, sat in a chair, perhaps even the exact chair I was sitting in right now, and forged a federal banking document. Greg watched my face. He asked if there was a problem with the application. He noted that it was flagged in their system because the address on the applicant profile did not match my current primary residence on file. That automated security flag was the only thing that stopped the initial processing and triggered the alert on my phone. I looked at Greg. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced my breathing to remain perfectly level. "This signature is forged," I said. I did not sign this document. I was at my office 20 miles away when this was submitted. I want this application canceled immediately, and I want a copy of this entire packet for my legal records. Greg sat up straight. The tired look vanished from his eyes. He reached out and took the paper back carefully, like it was suddenly toxic. He stammered an apology and started typing rapidly on his keyboard. He assured me the application would be voided and noted as fraudulent in the internal system. While he typed, I stared at the blank wall behind his head. The betrayal did not hit me like a physical blow. It felt more like a cold chemical settling into my bloodstream. My mother was willing to commit a felony to extract money from an asset I owned. 8 years ago, my parents sat in their living room surrounded by packing boxes. My father had lost his contracting business due to poor financial management. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The bank sent a notice of default. They were 60 days away from having the locks changed by the county sheriff. I was 24 years old, working my first junior underwriting job. I lived in a cheap apartment and ate rice and beans to build my savings account. I took every single dollar I had saved, all $42,000 of it. I went to the bank, holding their mortgage, and negotiated a short sale buyout. I purchased the Scottsdale house under my name. I became the sole legal owner. I told my parents they could stay. I told them they did not have to pay rent while they got back on their feet. I only asked them to cover the water and the electricity. A year later, Tyler moved into the guest room because he quit his job at a sporting goods store and could not afford his apartment lease. He told my parents he needed a quiet place to figure out his life path. He was 26 at the time. He never left. Over those 8 years, the narrative inside that house slowly mutated. Because they painted the walls and mowed the lawn, they convinced themselves it was still their house. They hosted neighborhood barbecues and talked about their property value. They treated me like a distant landlord who occasionally showed up for holidays. I paid the property taxes, I paid the hazard insurance, I paid the principal and the interest every single month without fail. They paid for cable television and premium groceries. And now my mother felt entitled enough to leverage my equity to bail out the son who never left the guest bedroom. Greg handed me a sealed envelope containing the voided application and the incident report. He offered to call the police to file formal charges. I shook my head. I told him I would handle the authorities on my own timeline. I walked out of the credit union and got back into my car. I did not grip the steering wheel and cry. Crying is a biological response to pain. I was not in pain. I was exposed. Betrayal from family does not require a grieving period. It requires immediate asset protection. I opened my laptop right there in the parking lot. I connected to my mobile hotspot. I logged into Experian. I clicked the button to place a hard security freeze on my credit profile. I repeated the process for Equifax and TransUnion. I filed a national fraud alert tied to my Social Security number. Any future attempt to open a credit line, a mortgage, or even a cell phone account in my name would now require direct phone verification and a matching PIN code. I locked every digital door I possessed. I closed the laptop. The click of the screen shutting felt incredibly satisfying. I had drawn the perimeter. I went to work. I spent the next 6 hours analyzing commercial risk profiles and calculating debt-to-income ratios for corporate clients. I treated my family crisis the exact same way I treated a bad loan application. I removed all sentiment. I looked only at the data. The data told me my family was a financial liability that was actively attempting to sabotage my future. At 4:15 in the afternoon, my cell phone vibrated on my desk. It was a message in the family group chat. The group included me, my mother, my father, and Tyler. I picked up the phone. My mother had sent a text. "Sunday dinner at our place this weekend." She added a smiling face emoji. "Huge news for Tyler. Everyone needs to be there. We are celebrating." I stared at the glowing screen. She had forged my signature the previous afternoon. She had tried to steal $50,000. She failed because the bank flagged the system. And now, less than 24 hours later, she was throwing a party. She was calling the Scottsdale property our place. She was demanding my presence to celebrate the very brother she had just committed fraud to protect. She thought I did not know. She assumed the bank simply delayed the processing of her loan. She believed she still held the power in the dynamic. She was operating under the delusion that the golden child was about to receive another unearned victory, while the scapegoat sat quietly in the corner and paid the tab. I rested my thumb over the keyboard. I did not ask what the news was. I did not mention the bank. I did not tell her her fraudulent application was currently sitting in a sealed envelope in my briefcase. I knew exactly what a Sunday dinner in that house meant. It meant a performance. It meant a staged event where my parents would attempt to corner me socially and emotionally in front of an audience. I typed 3 words. I will be there. I hit send. I slid the phone into my pocket. I was going to that dinner. But I was not going as an obedient daughter. I was going as the absolute owner of the ground they stood on. And whatever huge news they had planned for Tyler was about to run directly into a concrete wall of legal reality. Sunday evening arrived with a dry heat that baked the pavement radiating upward from the driveway. I parked my car on the street instead of pulling into the garage. I walked up the paved walkway of the Scottsdale property. I noted the landscaping. The agave plants and the fresh gravel looked pristine. My parents maintained the exterior meticulously. They treated the curb appeal as a reflection of their own success. They completely ignored the fact that the property tax assessment mailed to this address every single year bore only my legal name. I walked through the side gate into the backyard. The air smelled of barbecue smoke and thick complacency. My father sat in a patio chair holding a canned beer. He gave me a brief nod. He was a man who spent his entire life avoiding conflict by simply refusing to participate in reality. Tyler stood by the grill. He wore a designer polo shirt and held a pair of steel tongs. Next to him stood Chloe. Chloe was 26 years old. She and Tyler had been dating for exactly 6 months. I knew very little about her beyond what she projected on her public social media accounts. She posted daily about manifestation, luxury travel, and wellness retreats. She did not have a verifiable source of income. She held her phone up, recording a video of Tyler flipping burgers for her followers. My mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of sliced watermelon. She wore a bright floral sundress and a wide smile. She greeted me as if she had not committed a federal financial crime 4 days prior. The cognitive dissonance required to forge your own daughter's signature on a $50,000 bank loan and then invite her over for a family cookout was staggering. It confirmed my operating theory. My mother did not view me as a person. She viewed me as a utility. We sat around the teak dining table. The patio string lights flickered on as the sun dipped below the horizon. The conversation was entirely superficial. Tyler talked about his plans to start a new consulting business. He had 0 clients and no business license, but Chloe nodded along as if he were pitching a Fortune 500 company. I ate my grilled chicken in silence. I watched the dynamics play out. I waited for the performance to begin. It happened right after my mother cleared the dinner plates. Tyler stood up. He smoothed the front of his shirt. He reached down and took Chloe by the hand, pulling her to her feet. He cleared his throat to ensure he had the undivided attention of the table. He launched into a speech. He talked about how the past few years had been full of unpredictable challenges. He conveniently omitted the part where those challenges included 3 totaled rental cars and multiple failed business ventures funded by my parents. He looked deeply into Chloe's eyes. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket. He dropped to one knee on the composite decking that I had paid a contractor $12,000 to install 3 summers ago. Chloe gasped. She covered her mouth with her manicured hands. Tyler asked her to marry him. She said yes. My mother clapped her hands together and wiped away a tear. My father raised his beer can in a silent toast. I offered a polite nod. "Congratulations," I said. My voice was even. Tyler kissed his new fiancée and then turned to the table. "We have more news," he said. His chest puffed out. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. "Chloe and I have been talking about our future. We want to start building a foundation right away. We do not want to throw money away on rent." My mother stood up. She placed her hands on Tyler's shoulders. She looked at Chloe, and then she looked directly at me. Her smile was coated in sugar, but her eyes were entirely calculated. "Your father and I are so proud of the man Tyler has become," she said. "We want to give him the best possible start in life. So as our wedding gift to the 2 of you, we are giving you this house." The patio went dead silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the pool pump. "We want you to have a real family home," my mother continued, addressing Chloe. "You 2 can take the master bedroom. Dad and I will move into the smaller back room. We are downsizing our footprint so you can grow yours." Chloe squealed and hugged my mother. "Thank you so much," she said. "This is literally a dream come true. We already have so many ideas for renovations." My mother patted Chloe's back. Then she turned her gaze back to me. The sugar dropped from her voice. The tone shifted into an absolute order. It was the same tone she used when I was a teenager, failing to fold the laundry correctly. "Olivia," she said, "you still have those college boxes stored in the guest room closet. You need to clear those out. You have 60 days to get your things off the property. Chloe has a massive wardrobe, and she needs that space to build a custom walk-in closet." I did not gasp. I did not drop my napkin. I slowly reached out and set my stainless steel fork down on my ceramic plate. The metal clicked against the surface. It was a sharp, defining sound. I looked at my mother. I looked at Tyler. I looked at the influencer who thought she had just manifested a $750,000 asset. I kept my hands resting flat on my lap. I leaned forward just slightly. "How exactly do you plan to gift a house you do not own?" I asked. My voice was completely flat. I delivered the sentence the same way I delivered interest rate adjustments to uncooperative brokers. It carried 0 emotion and absolute finality. My mother's smile froze. Her facial muscles tightened. She glanced quickly at Chloe, who suddenly looked confused. My father shifted his weight in his chair and stared intently at a crack in the table. Tyler let out a short, dismissive laugh. He waved his hand in the air as if swatting away a minor inconvenience. "Come on, Liv," he said. "Do not play dumb. Mom already told me about the arrangement. She said you are coming by her office this Friday to sign the quitclaim deed. You are transferring the title over so we can get the property taxes reassessed under my name. Do not ruin this night for me." I looked at my brother. He genuinely believed it. My mother had not just forged a home equity application. When the bank flagged the loan and denied her the $50,000, she immediately pivoted to a secondary strategy. She promised Tyler the entire property. She sold him a narrative where I would willingly sign away hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity just because the family demanded it. She brought me to this dinner so the sheer social pressure of an engagement would force my compliance. She expected me to swallow the loss to avoid embarrassing them in front of the new fiancé. I did not argue. I did not correct him in front of his future wife. Arguing with a parasite only validates their presence. I simply looked at my mother. I watched the panic flicker behind her eyes. She knew the bank application had failed. She knew I had not agreed to a quitclaim deed. She was playing a massive game of chicken with my legal assets. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. "I will see you on Friday, Mom," I said. I stood up from the table. I did not offer another word of congratulations. I walked out of the backyard and down the driveway. I left them standing on my patio, celebrating the transfer of an illusion. I knew exactly what my mother would do next. She would attempt an ambush, and I would let her weave her own net right up until the moment it snapped shut. Friday morning began with the sterile hum of central air conditioning. I sat at my mahogany desk on the 14th floor of a downtown Phoenix commercial high-rise. The glass walls of my office overlooked the sprawling concrete grid of Maricopa County. My dual monitors displayed complex spreadsheets and risk assessment models. I process millions of dollars in corporate transactions daily. My entire career revolves around identifying liabilities and neutralizing them before they cause catastrophic losses. I do not operate on emotion. I operate on data. At 10:15, the digital phone on my console chimed. My receptionist spoke through the speaker. Her voice sounded hesitant. She told me my mother was waiting in the reception area. She added that my mother brought a guest and was insisting on an immediate meeting. I checked my calendar. My schedule was clear until noon. I instructed the receptionist to place them in conference room B. I picked up a legal pad and a pen. I walked down the carpeted hallway. Conference room B featured floor-to-ceiling glass panels allowing full visibility from the main corridor. I saw my mother pacing the length of the carpet. Beside her sat a man I had never seen before. He wore an ill-fitting tan suit and held a faded leather briefcase across his lap. He looked nervous. He looked like someone who advertised his legal services on a billboard above a discount tire shop. This was a classic psychological ambush. The strategy is simple. Bring a stranger into a professional corporate environment to leverage social embarrassment. The goal is to force the target to comply quickly to avoid making a public scene in front of colleagues. It is a tactic commonly used by individuals who lack actual leverage. I walked into the room and left the heavy glass door wide open. I did not offer them coffee or water. I sat at the head of the conference table. My mother stopped pacing. She manufactured a bright, artificial smile. She introduced the stranger as a licensed public notary. She reached into her designer handbag and extracted a thick manila envelope. She placed it on the polished wood table and slid it toward my chair. I looked down at the documents. The top sheet bore the official seal of the county recorder. It was a standard Arizona quitclaim deed. I scanned the text with the same speed I use to evaluate commercial loan applications. The grantor was listed as Olivia. The grantee was listed as Tyler. The property address matched my Scottsdale house perfectly. I dropped my eyes down to the consideration clause. That is the section dictating exactly how much the grantee is paying to acquire the asset. The typed amount read $1. My mother leaned forward, placing her palms flat against the table. Her voice dropped low, sounding urgent and conspiratorial. "Sign it, Olivia," she said. "Your brother needs stability right now. Chloe will leave him if he cannot provide a secure foundation for their future." She gestured toward the glass walls of my office. She pointed at the skyline view. "You have a great career," she continued. "You make plenty of money. You can easily buy another house for yourself. Do not be selfish. Your family needs this." I looked at her hands. I thought about the word stability. When Tyler was 22, he wanted to open a boutique fitness center. My parents co-signed a massive business loan to fund his dream. The gym collapsed in 8 months. When he was 28, he decided to flip vintage cars. My father liquidated half his retirement account to purchase initial inventory. Tyler crashed the inventory during a joyride. My brother never struggled to build a life. He only struggled to face the consequences of his own incompetence. My parents simply transferred his endless failures onto their personal balance sheets. And now they were attempting to transfer his ultimate failure onto mine. I looked back at the quitclaim deed, a $750,000 piece of prime real estate, a property I purchased to save them from living in a motel, a house I maintained, paid taxes on, and insured for almost a decade. They wanted me to hand it over for a single $1 bill to a man who could not successfully navigate a standard rental car agreement. I picked up my pen. I did not sign the dotted line. I used the tip of the pen to push the document back across the smooth table. I looked my mother dead in the eye. "No," I said. The artificial smile vanished from her face instantly. The public notary shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing nervously toward the open door. My mother realized the corporate social pressure tactic had failed. She immediately pivoted to her secondary weapon, victimhood. Her pitch became shrill. She stood up, pushing her chair back violently. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest and launched into a tearful performance. She accused me of pushing my brother to the brink of financial ruin. She claimed I was destroying our family out of pure spite and jealousy over his new engagement. Her volume steadily increased. Employees walking through the outer hallway began turning their heads. She was deliberately causing a disturbance to break my professional composure. I did not offer an explanation. Explaining reality to a delusional person only provides them with fuel to continue arguing. I stood up. I picked up my legal pad. I looked directly at the notary. I advised him to pack his briefcase and exit the premises immediately before I reported his license to the state board for participating in a coercive legal maneuver. He scrambled to gather his items and practically jogged out of the room. I turned my attention to the glass wall. I caught the eye of the floor security guard standing near the elevator banks. I gave him a brief nod and pointed a single finger toward conference room B. The guard walked over. He was an imposing professional who handled corporate disruptions quietly and efficiently. He stepped into the room and asked my mother to accompany him to the ground floor. My mother stopped shouting. The stark reality of being physically escorted out of a commercial building hit her. She snatched the quitclaim deed from the table and shoved it into her purse. She glared at me, stating I would deeply regret this decision. I watched her walk down the long hallway flanked by the security guard. I returned to my private office. I sat back down at my desk and resumed analyzing my risk assessment models. The entire interruption took exactly 12 minutes. That night, I sat on my sofa reviewing market trends on my tablet. The clock struck 9. My phone screen lit up with a text message notification. It was from my mother. It was not an apology. It was an ultimatum designed to trigger panic and force compliance. The message read, "You are dead to this family until you sign that paper." Most people would feel a crushing weight reading those words from a parent. I felt profound clarity. They had handed me a golden opportunity. A permanent severing of ties initiated by them meant I no longer had to navigate the social obligations of being an obedient daughter. I was officially released from the role of the family safety net. I opened the messaging app. I typed a single word in response. Understood. I blocked her number. I blocked my father. I blocked Tyler. The silence in my living room felt entirely different now. It was not the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of a secure perimeter. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. If I was officially dead to this family, then I was no longer required to subsidize their daily living expenses. I decided to initiate a comprehensive audit of the Scottsdale property. I pulled up the county assessor portal to calculate a precise eviction timeline. I navigated through the public tax records, expecting a routine ledger. Instead, I found a freshly filed document hiding in the title history. Something Tyler had buried deep in the county registry that put my entire financial future in immediate jeopardy. The silent treatment is a highly specific psychological tactic. Dysfunctional families utilize it as a mechanism of control. The goal is to isolate the target, to cultivate anxiety, and to manufacture guilt. They withdraw all communication and wait for the isolated individual to break under the pressure of rejection. They expect the target to reach out first, to apologize for causing the rift, and to eagerly comply with whatever demand was previously rejected. My family initiated their silent treatment on a Friday evening. Monday passed without a single text message. Tuesday brought 0 missed calls. Wednesday and Thursday featured an empty email inbox. They were executing their strategy flawlessly. They assumed I was sitting in my apartment agonizing over the loss of their affection. I was not agonizing. I was working. I used those 7 days of absolute quiet to do the exact thing my corporate career trained me to do. I conducted an exhaustive audit. I cleared off my dining room table. I set up my dual monitors and opened a blank master spreadsheet. I labeled the columns by date, payee, purpose, and amount. I logged into my primary banking portal and pulled every single transaction history dating back 8 years. I went back to the exact month I closed the short sale on the Scottsdale house. I intended to map the precise financial architecture of my relationship with my parents and my brother. The numbers populated row by row. Data does not carry emotional bias. It simply reflects reality. I started with the mortgage, $1,479 a month over 96 months. I added the property taxes paid to Maricopa County twice a year. I integrated the monthly homeowner association dues. I tallied the hazard insurance premiums required to protect the physical structure. The spreadsheet calculated the sum automatically. The bottom line appeared on my screen: $142,000. That was the direct capital I had injected into their shelter. I then created a secondary ledger to track their contributions. When I purchased the home, I told my parents they only needed to cover the electricity and the water to ease their financial recovery. Over the years, they often forwarded me various receipts, claiming they had invested in the property. I reviewed those receipts now. They had paid for premium landscaping services because my father disliked pulling weeds. They maintained a top-tier sports television package. They leased a luxury crossover vehicle to maintain appearances with their neighbors. They purchased high-end cuts of meat from specialty butchers. They prioritized lifestyle consumption, while I lived in a modest apartment and diverted a significant portion of my net income to ensure they did not face eviction. The financial asymmetry was stark, but it was the third ledger that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the week. On day 4 of the silent treatment, I pivoted from my personal bank records to the public municipal archives. I logged into the Maricopa County Recorder portal. As a real estate underwriter, I routinely check public registries to verify clear titles for corporate acquisitions. I typed my own parcel number into the search bar just to ensure the property tax status was correctly marked as paid. The index loaded. A new document sat near the top of the ledger. It had been filed exactly 3 months prior. The document type was listed as a notice of claim of lien. I clicked the link to open the scanned PDF. My eyes scanned the legal boilerplate. The claimant was a marine mechanics and storage facility located in Tempe. The debtor listed was a limited liability company called Desert Wave Rentals. The registered agent for that LLC was Tyler. The primary business address, officially recorded on the State Corporate Commission filing, was my property in Scottsdale. The total amount demanded on the lien was $15,000. I leaned back in my chair. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark room. A year ago, Tyler announced he was becoming an entrepreneur. He purchased 4 used jet skis on high-interest credit. He intended to rent them to college students at Lake Pleasant during the summer season. He drafted 0 business plans. He failed to secure proper commercial liability insurance. He neglected routine engine maintenance. Within 2 months, 3 of the watercraft suffered severe mechanical failures. He towed them to a repair shop in Tempe and authorized extensive engine rebuilds. When the $15,000 invoice came due, Tyler simply ignored the phone calls. He abandoned the jet skis at the shop and stopped answering emails. When a debtor defaults on a service contract, the creditor seeks legal recourse. Because Tyler registered his defunct rental company using my Scottsdale address, the marine shop filed a mechanic lien against the physical real estate tied to that business profile. My brother had legally encumbered my asset. A lien is not a minor administrative error. It is a severe legal threat. It acts as a heavy anchor attached directly to the property title. Because that document existed in the county records, I could not sell the house. I could not refinance the mortgage. If the $15,000 debt remained unpaid, the marine shop held the theoretical right to force a foreclosure sale on my property to satisfy the outstanding balance. Tyler had weaponized my charity. My mother had forged a federal banking document to extract $50,000. Tyler had attached a $15,000 legal liability to my deed. And their combined solution to this massive financial wreckage was to invite me to a backyard barbecue and demand I hand over the entire house for $1 single dollar. The silent treatment is designed to make the target crave reconciliation. The 7 days of silence granted me something far more valuable. It eradicated my final trace of leniency. On day 6, I picked up my phone. I did not dial my mother. I dialed my real estate attorney. His name is Marcus. I work with him frequently on complex commercial zoning disputes. He is sharp, highly analytical, and operates without sentiment. He answered on the second ring. I did not offer small talk. I provided a concise situation report. I emailed him the voided credit union application featuring the forged signature. I attached the quitclaim deed my mother tried to force upon me in the conference room. I forwarded the certified copy of the mechanic lien filed by the Tempe Marine Shop. Marcus reviewed the files while we stayed on the open line. I heard the steady click of his mouse. Your brother tied an unsecured business debt to your primary residential title, Marcus said. His tone was strictly professional. And your mother committed wire fraud. How do you want to proceed? I looked at the spreadsheet still open on my monitor. $142,000 in unappreciated grace. Draft a 30-day notice to quit, I said. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second. A notice to quit is the initial legal mechanism required to terminate a tenancy in Arizona. It is the mandatory precursor to a formal eviction lawsuit. They are classified as month-to-month tenants under state law, I continued. They have no formal lease, they pay no rent. Their presence is now an active legal liability to my portfolio. I want the notice drafted, printed, and served via certified mail. I will have the draft in your inbox by noon tomorrow, Marcus replied. I hung up the phone. The family system was a failing infrastructure project built on fraud and entitlement. It was time for a controlled demolition. On day 7, the silence finally broke. The family realized their punitive isolation strategy was not yielding the desired signature. The golden child still needed his wedding gift, and the clock was ticking. They needed a new angle. They needed someone else to apply the pressure. My phone vibrated against the desk. The caller identification displayed a name I had not spoken to in over a year. The emissary had been deployed. In behavioral psychology, there is a specific term for a person dispatched by a manipulator to do their bidding. They are commonly referred to as flying monkeys. The manipulator feeds this emissary a highly edited version of reality. The emissary then attacks the target under the guise of keeping the peace or protecting the family unit. The goal is to outsource the harassment while the primary aggressor maintains clean hands. My mother deployed her first proxy on a Thursday afternoon. My phone vibrated against the glass surface of my home office desk. The caller identification displayed the name Susan. Susan is my mother's younger sister. She lives in Tucson and manages a dental clinic. We typically speak twice a year during major holidays. She is a woman who thrives on proximity to crisis. When she calls outside of December, it means she has been activated to manage a narrative. I picked up the device and accepted the call. I did not offer a warm greeting. I simply stated her name. Susan did not ask how I was doing. She launched directly into a rehearsed reprimand. Her voice was breathless and pitched high to convey urgency. "Olivia, your mother is having severe chest pains," she said. "She spent the entire morning at the urgent care clinic. The doctor said her blood pressure is dangerously elevated. She is having heart palpitations because of you." I leaned back in my chair. The medical emergency is the oldest strategy in the playbook. It shifts the focus away from the original transgression and places the burden of biological survival squarely onto the victim. If you do not comply with the demand, you are essentially accused of causing physical harm. I kept my breathing steady. I waited for her to deliver the core directive. "I cannot believe you are doing this," Susan continued. "You are trying to steal Tyler's wedding gift. Your parents promised him that house to start his new life with Chloe. You already have a successful career. You have your own money. Why are you punishing your brother? You need to drop this nonsense and be the bigger person." I picked up a silver pen from my desk. I held it between my thumb and forefinger. The phrase, "be the bigger person," is family code. It translates directly to absorb the damage so the rest of us do not have to look at it. It means accepting a loss to maintain a comfortable illusion for the collective group. I tapped the metal tip of the pen against the glass desk. A single, sharp click. "Aunt Susan," I said. My tone matched the temperature of the air conditioning vent above my head. Did my mother happen to mention the part where she walked into a credit union and forged my signature on a federal banking document to take out a $50,000 loan? The line went dead quiet. The manufactured urgency vanished. Did she mention that she committed wire fraud to pay off a rental car company because your 34-year-old nephew wrapped a rented Tesla around a light pole? I asked. Susan drew a sharp breath. She stammered. She started a sentence and then stopped. "Well," she said, "your mother said there was a misunderstanding about some paperwork." "It was not a misunderstanding," I replied. "It was a felony." "And did she mention the $15,000 mechanic lien Tyler attached to my property deed because he defaulted on a jet ski repair bill?" The silence returned. This time it was heavy. It was the sound of a carefully constructed narrative collapsing under the weight of empirical data. Susan had marched into this conversation expecting to scold a selfish niece. Instead, she found herself standing in the blast radius of her sister's financial crimes. "I am not stealing a wedding gift," I said. "I am securing an asset that I purchased with my own money 8 years ago to keep my parents out of bankruptcy court. I suggest you ask your sister for the police report before you call my phone again." I ended the call. I placed the phone face down. The emissary had been neutralized. 10 minutes later, the device vibrated again. The screen displayed Tyler's name. The golden child was realizing the proxy had failed. He was stepping onto the battlefield himself. I did not answer. I let the phone ring until the automated voicemail system engaged. 2 minutes later, a notification icon appeared indicating a new audio message. I clicked play and routed the sound through my desktop speakers. Tyler sounded panicked and erratic. He was shouting into the receiver. The background noise indicated he was driving. "You think you are so smart, Olivia," he yelled. "You think you can just kick me out of my own home. Mom told me what you said to Susan. You are a liar. I have been living in this house for 8 years. I know my rights. I spoke to a guy at the gym and he told me about squatter rights. If you try to change the locks, I will take you to court for adverse possession. I will sue you for emotional distress and I will take the whole property. You owe me." The recording ended with the sound of a heavy sigh and a disconnected click. I sat in my chair and processed the sheer magnitude of his legal ignorance. He was referencing adverse possession. It is a real legal doctrine, but his application of it was entirely fictional. Under Arizona state law, claiming adverse possession requires the occupant to physically possess the property exclusively and continuously. More importantly, it legally requires the occupant to pay the property taxes on that specific parcel for a minimum of 3 consecutive years while holding a recorded deed. Tyler had never paid a single property tax bill in his life. He did not hold a deed. He was a guest residing in a spare bedroom. His threat was a combination of daytime television law and pure desperation. He had 0 legal standing. He also threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress. In civil litigation, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress requires proving extreme and outrageous conduct that results in severe psychological trauma. Securing my own real estate portfolio against a documented lien does not meet the threshold for outrageous conduct. It meets the threshold for basic financial literacy. I did not delete the voicemail. I opened my audio application. I downloaded the voice message as an MP4 file. I opened the encrypted digital folder on my desktop labeled Legal Evidence. I dragged the file into the folder. It sat directly beneath the PDF of the forged bank application and the copy of the Tempe Marine Shop lien. The documentation was pristine. The door to my home office opened. David walked in. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. David is 33 years old. He is a senior data analyst for a logistics firm. We met 3 years ago while evaluating a commercial zoning data set for a mutual client. He operates the same way I do. He strips away the noise and isolates the variables. We do not engage in dramatic arguments. We solve problems using logic. He held 2 ceramic mugs. He walked over to the glass desk and set a mug of black coffee next to my keyboard. He looked at the dual monitors. The left screen displayed the county assessor ledger. The right screen displayed the draft of the 30-day notice to quit prepared by my attorney. David read the header of the legal document. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer platitudes about family dynamics. He understood the math. He knew exactly how much capital I had drained to keep my parents afloat. He knew about the forgery. He took a sip from his own mug. He looked down at me. "Are you ready to finish this?" he asked. I picked up my coffee. The ceramic was warm against my palm. "I am," I said. I opened my email application to instruct my attorney to formalize the eviction notice. Before my fingers touched the keyboard, a new message populated in my inbox. It was an electronic invitation sent from an event planning platform. The sender was Chloe. I clicked the digital envelope. An animated card slid onto the screen. It was an invitation to an engagement party. The venue listed was the backyard of the Scottsdale property. The date was set for the upcoming Saturday. Below the formal cursive text was a personalized note typed by Chloe. "We are so excited to celebrate with everyone. We will be doing a special key handover ceremony at 8 in the evening. Please remember to bring the paperwork, Olivia. We cannot wait to start our new chapter." I stared at the glowing text. They were not backing down. The failure of the forged loan and the failure of the flying monkey only accelerated their timeline. They were setting a trap. They had invited an entire audience to a party. They planned to place me in the center of a crowd and use peer pressure to force me to sign away a $750,000 asset. They wanted a public spectacle. They believed a public arena gave them the advantage. I picked up my phone and added the event to my calendar. They were about to learn that bringing an audience to a financial execution only ensures there are witnesses to the outcome. 2 days after the digital notification appeared on my screen, a thick envelope arrived in my physical mailbox. It was mailed via priority postage. The paper was heavy cream cardstock. The return address, printed in elegant cursive on the upper left corner, belonged to my own house in Scottsdale. They were officially claiming my legal residence as their permanent domain on public correspondence. I carried the envelope inside and placed it on the kitchen island. I used a silver letter opener to slice through the thick paper. I slid the invitation out and laid it flat on the granite countertop. The front of the card featured elaborate gold foil lettering. It formally invited the recipient to an engagement celebration honoring Chloe and Tyler. The venue was listed simply as the family estate, followed by my property address. The event was scheduled for 8 in the evening on the upcoming Saturday. I turned the heavy cardstock over. On the back, written in blue ink with looping, exaggerated letters, was a personalized note from Chloe. "We are doing the key handover ceremony at 8 sharp. Please remember to bring the paperwork, Olivia. We cannot wait to start our new chapter." I stared at the blue ink. The strategy was incredibly transparent. My mother and Tyler had combined forces to engineer a social trap. They were cornering me using the oldest weapon in suburban society: public pressure. They had invited 80 guests to this event. The guest list would undoubtedly include our extended relatives, neighbors, who waved to my parents every morning, and a large contingent of Chloe and her internet-focused friends. These were people who only knew the curated version of my family. They were an audience carefully selected to serve as a jury. My family believed that placing me in the center of a crowded backyard surrounded by string lights and catered food would act as an emotional straitjacket. They assumed the sheer weight of 80 expectant faces would crush my resistance. In their minds, I would never dare to cause a scene at a formal celebration. They expected my professional conditioning and my desire to maintain social decorum to override my financial self-preservation. They thought I would bow my head, paste a compliant smile on my face, and sign a $750,000 asset over to my brother just to save face and keep the peace. They fundamentally misunderstood how I operate. Chloe was an essential component of their delusion. She grew up in a standard middle-class suburb, but she spent her entire adult life curating a digital existence of immense luxury. She posted photographs from upscale hotel lobbies and leased sports cars. She met Tyler at a high-end lounge in downtown Phoenix. Tyler had driven a rented Tesla that night. He purchased her expensive cocktails using a credit card linked directly to my father and his dwindling retirement account. Chloe genuinely believed she had secured a wealthy heir to an established real estate portfolio. She did not know the man she intended to marry lacked the credit score required to secure a basic apartment lease. She was completely unaware that the foundation of her new chapter was built entirely on my stolen charity. David walked into the kitchen. He had just finished a virtual conference call with his logistics team. He wore a gray sweater and held a glass of water. He walked over to the island and looked down at the cream cardstock resting on the granite. He read the gold foil lettering on the front. He reached out and flipped the card over. He read the handwritten note from Chloe. He did not react with shock. He processed the information with the same analytical detachment he applied to shipping delays and supply chain failures. He set the card down. He took a sip of water. "They are throwing a party funded by your parents on property you own to formally demand you surrender your title," he said. "The audacity is almost mathematically perfect." I nodded. "It is a calculated ambush," I replied. David leaned against the counter. He crossed his arms over his chest. "Do you want to skip the circus?" he asked. "We can RSVP, no right now. We can stay home, order dinner, and let them try to explain your absence to their 80 guests. You do not owe them an appearance." I looked at the invitation. I smoothed the heavy paper flat against the stone surface. I felt the embossed lettering under my fingertips. Ignoring the invitation was the easiest path. It was the path of least resistance. But taking the easy path in a conflict with manipulative people is always a strategic error. If I do not show up, my mother controls the narrative. I explained. She will stand in front of that crowd and deliver a tearful speech about her estranged, ungrateful daughter who refused to support her brother. She will paint me as the villain who abandoned the family. She will use my absence as proof of my cruelty. I cannot allow her to write the final chapter of this story unchallenged. David watched my face. He understood the logic. "What is your countermeasure?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I am not going to skip the party. They went through a tremendous amount of effort to organize a public property handover. I am going to give them exactly what they asked for. I am going to give them a legally binding one. I walked away from the kitchen island and headed toward my home office. The paradigm had shifted. I was no longer the bullied younger sister who used to eat a sandwich alone in a dark kitchen while her parents bought cake for a brother who failed. I was a 32-year-old commercial underwriter. I held the deed. I held the equity. I held the unassailable power of documented facts. When a commercial bank faces a defaulting borrower who refuses to vacate the premises, the bank does not hide from the conflict. The bank does not avoid the property out of embarrassment. The bank sends a representative to enforce the terms of the contract. I was the bank. My parents and Tyler were the defaulting borrowers. They were attempting a hostile takeover of my asset, using social shame as their primary leverage. I needed to prepare my own leverage. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. I opened my legal evidence folder. I did not need to bring a quitclaim deed to this party. I needed to bring the paperwork they actually deserved. I needed the 30-day notice to quit currently being drafted by Marcus. I needed the recorded mechanic lien from the county assessor, proving Tyler had encumbered my title with his failed jet ski business. I needed the incident report from the credit union, detailing my mother and her attempt to commit federal wire fraud. I would place every single document into a standard manila folder. I would carry that folder into the backyard. The confrontation was now entirely unavoidable. They built a stage and invited an audience to watch my financial execution. I decided to step onto that exact stage and reverse the charges. I will walk into that backyard not as a sibling asked to make a sacrifice, but as a secured creditor collecting a debt. The trap they set was about to spring backward. But before I stepped into their arena, I needed to ensure my legal perimeter was flawless. I needed to launch a preemptive strike to lock the property down so tightly that no amount of tears or public manipulation could ever pry it loose. Thursday arrived with a dry wind sweeping across the valley. My inbox chimed at exactly 9 in the morning. The sender was Marcus. The attachment was a single PDF file containing the finalized 30-day notice to quit. I opened the document and reviewed the formatting. It was flawless. The header cited the specific Arizona revised statutes governing the termination of a month-to-month tenancy. Because my parents and Tyler never signed a formal lease, they were legally classified as tenants at will. Terminating their residency did not require proving a breach of contract. It only required 30 days of formal written notice demanding they vacate the premises. I printed the document on heavy bond paper. The printer hummed, dispensing the pages into the output tray. I placed the notice on my desk. It was the first piece of ammunition. But a notice is simply a mechanism for removal. I needed a mechanism to prevent them from ever claiming future ownership. I needed to make my absolute control over the asset entirely public. I picked up my phone and called a colleague named Sarah. Sarah is an elite residential broker who handles high net worth relocations across the Phoenix metropolitan area. We frequently collaborate when my corporate clients need executive housing. I explained my objective. I wanted to list the Scottsdale residence on the multiple listing service immediately. Sarah did not ask probing personal questions. She logged into her broker portal while we spoke. We established the listing parameters: 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,800 square feet. We set the asking price at $850,000 based on my recent internal valuation. I instructed her to set the listing status to coming soon. In the real estate industry, this specific designation acts as a massive digital billboard. It alerts every licensed agent in the state that a prime piece of inventory is about to hit the market. The data automatically syndicates to consumer platforms within hours. Anyone searching for homes in that specific zip code would see the exterior photographs of my house. By noon, the listing was live on the network. Tyler and my parents were currently buying party supplies and preparing a backyard for a fake key handover ceremony. They had no idea their venue was already being actively marketed to aggressive residential buyers across the country. I had effectively sold the ground out from under their feet, before the party even began. The next phase required a physical trip. On Friday morning, I drove to the local police precinct. The station was a brutalist concrete building surrounded by chain-link fences. I walked through the heavy glass doors and approached the front desk. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. A tired desk sergeant looked up from his computer terminal. I stated my purpose clearly. I wanted to file an identity theft and fraud report. I handed him the sealed envelope provided by the credit union branch manager. The sergeant pulled out the voided home equity line of credit application. I pointed directly to the forged signature on the bottom line. I provided my government-issued identification to prove my identity. I gave him my mother's full legal name and her current residential address. The sergeant typed the information into his database. He asked if I wanted to press formal charges and dispatch officers to arrest her. I declined the immediate arrest. I explained I was securing an informational incident report to create a verified paper trail. In the criminal justice system, establishing a timeline is paramount. If my mother ever attempted to claim the loan application was a misunderstanding or a joint venture, I now possessed a time-stamped police record proving I flagged it as a felony the moment I discovered it. I was locking the doors so she could not rewrite history later. This was not her first forgery. When Tyler was a sophomore in high school, he skipped 2 weeks of classes to play video games. The school district threatened truancy charges. My mother intercepted the mail, stole official letterhead from a local pediatric clinic, and forged a physician's signature claiming Tyler suffered from chronic migraines. She successfully shielded him from academic expulsion. She learned early that deception could maintain her preferred reality. She simply graduated from falsifying high school attendance records to attempting federal wire fraud. The sergeant printed a copy of the incident report. It featured a bold tracking number across the top margin. He handed it to me and advised me to keep it in a secure location. I thanked him and walked back to my car. The second piece of ammunition was secured. Saturday afternoon arrived with a stifling wave of heat. The engagement celebration was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. I was sitting at my kitchen island, drinking a glass of sparkling water, when my phone screen illuminated. It was a text message from my mother. It was the first direct communication since she declared me dead to the family. The message read, "Do not ruin your brother's big day tonight. Wear the blue dress." I stared at the screen and smirked. The sheer psychological delusion required to send that text was remarkable. She was ordering me to wear a specific garment. The blue dress was a conservative, knee-length silk outfit I wore to corporate holiday functions. She wanted me to wear it because it photographed well and fit her aesthetic vision for the family portraits. She was completely ignoring the financial standoff. She was treating me like a prop in her theatrical production. She assumed her authoritative tone would force me back into my historical role of quiet compliance. I did not reply to the text. I walked into my home office and sat at the desk. I pulled a standard manila folder from my supply drawer. I opened it and began arranging the documents. The stack was meticulously organized. The top page was the 30-day notice to quit terminating their tenancy. The second page was the printed multiple listing service sheet displaying the house as an active, coming soon property. The third page was the recorded mechanic lien from the Tempe Marine Shop, proving Tyler had legally compromised the title. The final page was the official police incident report detailing my mother's forgery attempt. 4 pieces of paper. Together, they represented the absolute dismantling of a decades-long dynamic of exploitation. I closed the manila folder. I ran my hand over the smooth cardboard cover. There were no ribbons or wrapping paper involved in this handover. My brother wanted a foundation to build on. My mother wanted a seamless performance to validate her favoritism. I was going to provide them with the stark, unvarnished truth. I walked into my bedroom to get dressed. I bypassed the blue silk dress hanging in the closet. I selected a charcoal gray tailored blazer and a crisp white blouse. It was the exact outfit I wore when presenting final risk assessments to corporate boards. I was not dressing for a family celebration. I was dressing for a legal demolition. David met me by the front door. He wore a dark suit jacket and held his car keys. He looked at the manila folder tucked under my arm. He understood the gravity of the payload I was carrying. We stepped out into the evening heat. The drive to Scottsdale would take approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes until I walked into a backyard filled with 80 people who expected me to surrender my future. The trap was fully set and the audience was gathering. They had no idea I was bringing the match to burn the entire stage to the ground. The asphalt radiated the day's accumulated heat back into the evening air. The dashboard display in David's vehicle registered 102 degrees as we turned onto Oak Street. The neighborhood was usually quiet on the Saturday night. Today, a line of cars stretched down the entire block. I recognized several vehicles belonging to my extended relatives. I also noted a cluster of expensive leased sports cars that undoubtedly belonged to Chloe and her internet social circle. We parked 2 streets over to avoid the congestion. I stepped out into the dry wind. I wore my charcoal blazer. I carried the manila folder securely under my left arm. David walked beside me in his dark suit. We did not speak during the short walk to the property. There was nothing left to strategize. The perimeter was secured, and the payload was prepared. We approached the side gate of the Scottsdale residence. I could hear the rhythmic thumping of a rented sound system long before I reached the latch. I pushed the wooden gate open and stepped into my own backyard. The space had been transformed into a highly curated theatrical set. Strings of warm Edison bulbs crisscrossed the sky above the lawn, creating a golden canopy. Tall cocktail tables draped in white linen were scattered across the grass. Centerpieces of fresh white hydrangeas sat on every surface. A team of hired caterers navigated through the crowd of 80 guests, carrying silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. My parents had spared zero expense to celebrate the transfer of a stolen asset. They likely financed this entire production using a high-interest credit card, banking on the assumption that my equity would somehow cover their debts in the future. I stood near the edge of the patio, taking in the visual data. The crowd hummed with laughter and overlapping conversations. Before I could take a second step forward, a figure moved rapidly through the crowd. It was my mother. She wore a bright floral dress that contrasted sharply with the calculated panic in her eyes. She reached me in seconds. She did not offer a greeting. She did not introduce David to the relatives standing nearby. She reached out and grabbed my right forearm. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my blazer with surprising force. "I told you to wear the blue dress," she hissed. Her voice was pitched low to avoid alerting the nearby guests, but the tone was entirely venomous. She pulled my arm, attempting to physically guide me toward the center of the yard. I planted my feet on the concrete pavers. I did not move. "Just smile," she whispered, leaning her face close to mine. "Come up and sign the paper when Tyler calls your name. Do this one simple thing, and we can all go back to being a happy family tonight." I looked down at her hand gripping my sleeve. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of intimidation. "Remove your hand from my jacket," I said. My delivery was completely flat. It was the same vocal cadence a bank officer uses to decline a fraudulent withdrawal. My mother blinked. The rigid authority in my voice broke her momentum. She slowly uncurled her fingers and let her hand drop to her side. I stepped around her. I walked over to a temporary bar set up near the edge of the pool. I asked the bartender for a glass of sparkling water with a lime. I took a slow, calm sip. I turned my attention to the center of the yard to observe the primary beneficiary of this charade. Tyler was holding court. He stood on the composite wooden deck holding a glass of expensive scotch. He was surrounded by a group of Chloe's friends. He waved his free hand in wide, sweeping gestures, outlining an invisible blueprint in the air. I listened closely to his presentation. He was explaining his grand architectural vision for the house. He told the group he planned to completely gut the kitchen. He described tearing down the load-bearing wall to create an open-concept floor plan for his new nest. The sheer audacity of his presentation was remarkable. 5 years ago, I paid a premium contractor to install custom cherrywood cabinets and quartz countertops in that exact kitchen. Tyler was standing on my property drinking liquor purchased by my father, proposing the demolition of my personal upgrades. His fiction did not stop at the kitchen. He pointed his scotch glass downward at the composite decking beneath his feet. He told the captivated audience that he designed the deck himself and spent 3 weekends installing the joists to ensure the foundation was perfect. I took another sip of my sparkling water. 3 years ago, a subterranean termite infestation rotted the original wooden deck. My parents called me in a panic because they lacked the funds to address the structural damage. I hired a licensed structural engineer and a professional decking crew. I wrote a check for $12,000 to protect the property value. Tyler slept until noon every day the crew was working. He never lifted a hammer. Parasites possess a unique psychological framework. They do not just consume the resources of the host. They eventually convince themselves that they created the resources. They believe someone else's assets are theirs by default simply because they exist in the same proximity. Tyler was not just lying to his future wife and her friends. He had repeated the lies so many times, he internalized it as truth. I scanned the rest of the crowd. I spotted Aunt Susan standing near the catering tent. She clutched a napkin and watched me with wide, nervous eyes. She remembered our phone call. She knew the narrative my mother sold her was a fabrication, but she lacked the moral courage to intervene. She was a silent spectator waiting for the collision. Chloe was nearby, posing for photographs. Her friends held up circular ring lights to ensure her digital content was perfectly illuminated. She was documenting the peak of her social climb. She was capturing permanent digital evidence of a transaction that would never occur. David stood quietly at my side. He observed the mechanics of the party with the detached fascination of a sociologist studying a doomed civilization. He noticed the manila folder resting securely against my hip. He checked the face of his silver wristwatch. "The time is 8:20, he stated. I nodded. The atmosphere in the backyard began to shift. The ambient music playing through the rented speakers faded down to a low murmur. The caterers moved swiftly through the crowd, distributing fresh flutes of champagne to every guest. The orchestrated sequence was beginning. My mother positioned herself near the front of the deck. She smoothed her floral dress and projected a radiant, artificial smile to the audience. My father stood a few feet behind her, staring at the grass, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Tyler handed his empty scotch glass to a passing waiter. He took a fresh glass of champagne. He reached out and grabbed Chloe by the hand, pulling her up onto the deck beside him. He stood at the highest point of the yard, elevating himself above the 80 guests. The trap was fully deployed. The audience was primed. The narrative was set. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a wireless microphone. The low hum of the guests fell into a hushed, expectant silence. I set my glass of sparkling water on a nearby table. I adjusted my grip on the manila folder. I did not feel a trace of anxiety. I felt the cold, precise focus of an auditor preparing to deliver a final ruling. The clock neared 8:30. The performance was about to start, and I was fully prepared to deliver the closing act. The clock struck 8:30 in the evening. The transition began precisely as my mother had orchestrated. The hired catering staff quietly retreated to the perimeter of the lawn, holding their silver serving trays against their waists. The ambient music playing through the rented speakers faded down to a barely audible hum. Tyler raised his left arm. He held a crystal champagne flute, catching the warm glow of the overhead lights. In his right hand, he held a heavy silver spoon. He brought the metal to the glass. He tapped the spoon against the crystal 3 times. The sharp, ringing sound cut cleanly through the murmur of 80 conversations. The guests immediately stopped talking. They turned their bodies toward the wooden deck. Tyler stood at the highest elevation in the yard. Chloe stood pressed tightly against his side. She wore a pristine white dress and held her own glass of champagne. Her friends had already migrated to the front of the crowd. They held their smartphones at chest level with the camera lenses pointed directly at the couple. They were capturing the moment for digital consumption. The Edison bulbs cast a golden light over Tyler, making him look remarkably like the triumphant protagonist of a romantic film. I stood quietly near the edge of the patio, observing the sheer mechanical precision of the illusion. Tyler cleared his throat. He brought a wireless microphone to his mouth. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. His voice echoed across the manicured grass. He paused, allowing the weight of his opening statement to settle over the audience. "Chloe and I are starting a brand new chapter together. Getting to this point has not always been an easy journey. We have all faced unpredictable challenges. I have had to overcome a lot of hurdles in my life to finally find my true path." I listened to his confident delivery of the word hurdles. A hurdle implies a rigid external obstacle placed in your way by fate or difficult circumstances. Tyler never faced a hurdle he did not actively construct himself. When he was 29 years old, he convinced my parents to co-sign a lease for a luxury downtown loft he could not afford on a part-time salary. He was evicted 6 months later for hosting destructive parties that severely damaged the hardwood floors. The property management company sued my parents for $10,000 in damages. My father drained his emergency savings account to settle the lawsuit out of court to avoid a public judgment. Tyler called that eviction a learning experience. Now he was standing on a deck I financed, framing his documented history of gross negligence as a heroic journey of personal growth. Tyler shifted his posture. He looked down at the front row of the gathered audience. "None of this would be possible without two incredible people," he said. He pointed toward my parents. "They are absolute saints. They have supported me through every single storm. And tonight, they are giving Chloe and me the ultimate blessing." He swept his free hand in a wide, generous arc encompassing the entire property. "They are gifting us this amazing house so we can start our lives with a rock-solid foundation," he announced. The crowd let out a collective sound of awe. A few people clapped their hands. It was the exact emotional currency my mother desperately craved. She stood in the center of the front row wearing her bright floral dress. She beamed with radiant, unfiltered pride. She reached up and dabbed at the corner of her eye with a white cocktail napkin. She was absorbing the admiration of 80 people for a monumental act of generosity she had absolutely no legal capacity to execute. She looked like a wealthy philanthropist receiving an award for a donation she funded with stolen money. Beside her stood my father. He did not look up at his son. He kept his hands shoved deep into his trouser pockets and stared intently at the tips of his leather shoes. My father spent his entire marriage treating passivity as a supreme virtue. 8 years ago, when the bank sent the original foreclosure notices, he simply placed the unopened envelopes in a desk drawer and went fishing. He signed the short sale documents transferring the property to me without reading the clauses. He knew the title belonged exclusively to me. He knew the recent bank loan application had been forged by his wife. Yet he remained completely silent, allowing the theft to proceed, because speaking the truth required confronting the architect of the lie. His perpetual silence was the mortar that held their shared delusion together. Tyler took a slow sip of his champagne. The crowd finished clapping for my parents. Tyler lowered his glass. His eyes scanned the faces in the yard and locked directly onto my position. The spotlight of his attention shifted. "But there is one more person who needs to be recognized tonight," he said into the microphone. His tone became magnanimous. It was the tone of a gracious victor acknowledging a defeated opponent. "My little sister Olivia is here tonight," Tyler announced. He pointed his index finger straight at me. 80 heads swiveled in unison. Suddenly, 160 eyes were fixed on my face. "Olivia has been keeping this place warm for us," Tyler joked. He offered a wide smile, eliciting a ripple of light laughter from his friends and the extended relatives. "She is here tonight to officially pass the torch. Come on up here, Liv. Bring the paperwork and let us make this official." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. The social pressure reached its absolute zenith. This was the exact mechanism my mother had engineered when she planned this gathering. In the unwritten rulebook of polite suburban society, you do not cause a scene at a formal engagement party. You do not humiliate your immediate family in front of their friends and neighbors. You smile and you nod and you swallow your objections to preserve the collective harmony of the group. They constructed this elaborate arena, believing I would be too paralyzed by the audience to assert my legal rights. They scripted a scene where I was supposed to look flustered, fold under the heavy, expectant gaze of their peers, and quietly surrender a $750,000 asset. They wanted me to hand over my financial future simply to protect their fragile social standing. I did not flush with embarrassment. My heart rate did not elevate. I experienced the cold, sharp clarity of a commercial underwriter closing a non-compliant account. I looked at Tyler, standing on the deck, with his outstretched hand. I looked at Chloe, holding her phone, ready to record my capitulation. I looked at my mother, wearing her triumphant, expectant smile. I reached out and set my glass of sparkling water down on the nearest linen-draped table. The heavy base of the glass made a soft thud against the wood beneath the fabric. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I reached down to my side. I picked up the standard manila folder. The folder contained the 30-day eviction notice terminating their residency. It contained the active real estate listing, proving the house was currently being marketed to buyers across the state. It contained the recorded mechanic lien, proving Tyler had legally compromised the title. It contained the official police incident report, detailing my mother and her attempt to commit federal wire fraud. I stepped away from the perimeter. I began to walk through the crowd. The guests parted automatically, creating a narrow, clear pathway toward the wooden deck. The applause continued ringing in my ears, but it sounded distant and entirely irrelevant. I wore my tailored charcoal blazer and maintained a perfectly measured professional stride. I did not look like a younger sister joining a family celebration. I looked like a corporate auditor arriving to liquidate a bankrupt subsidiary. I reached the base of the wooden stairs. Tyler smiled down at me, offering the wireless microphone. He genuinely thought he had won. He believed the paperwork secured in my hand was the quitclaim deed, transferring my ownership into his possession. I stepped onto the first wooden plank. The confrontation was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was happening right now, under the warm glow of the Edison bulbs, with 80 witnesses watching every movement. I reached out to take the microphone from his hand, preparing to deliver a message that would permanently shatter their meticulously crafted reality. I stepped onto the first wooden plank of the deck. My low heels made a hollow thud against the composite material. Tyler extended his arm, offering the black wireless microphone. His face was flushed with the thrill of his own performance. Chloe stood beside him, shifting her weight from foot to foot, eager to receive her grand prize. The guests continued to applaud. The sound washed over the yard like a synchronized wave of approval. I reached out and took the microphone. The plastic cylinder felt cold and heavy in my palm. I tucked the manila folder securely under my left arm. I did not open it immediately. I turned my body to face the audience of 80 people. When I was 28 years old, I presented my first solo risk assessment to a board of senior bank executives. They were men with decades of experience who scrutinized every decimal point. I did not flinch during that presentation because I knew my data was bulletproof. Standing on this patio required the exact same discipline. The people gathered on the lawn were not executives, but they were a jury my mother had specifically assembled to force a verdict in her favor. They expected a heartwarming speech from a supportive younger sister. They anticipated a tearful embrace and the physical handover of a property deed. They were waiting for a scripted surrender. I raised the microphone to my lips. I did not clear my throat. I did not tap the metal grill to check the volume. I simply began to speak. My voice projected through the rented speakers. I used the sharp, calibrated tone of an underwriter rejecting a fabricated portfolio. I did not yell. Yelling implies a loss of control. It signals emotional instability. I maintained absolute vocal precision. Tyler failed his driving test 3 times, I said. The sentence echoed across the manicured grass. The applause sputtered and died instantly. A few guests exchanged confused glances. Chloe lowered her champagne flute, her perfectly glossed lips parting in slight confusion. I kept my eyes locked on the back row of the crowd, projecting my words evenly over their heads. When he failed, my parents bought a vanilla sheet cake from the grocery store. I continued. They tied mylar balloons to the dining chairs to celebrate his attempts. When I turned 16, I passed my driving exam on the first try. I came home to an empty kitchen and ate a sandwich standing alone in the dark. That dynamic was established 16 years ago. It never changed. It merely escalated in cost. I shifted my gaze to the center of the yard where my mother stood. Her triumphant smile wavered. The edges of her mouth twitched. Tyler let out a short, nervous chuckle, attempting to frame my opening statement as a dry sibling joke. He leaned toward the microphone to interrupt. I took a half step away from him, claiming the physical space. I did not yield the floor. A few minutes ago, Tyler told all of you that our parents were saints who blessed him with this amazing house to start his new life, I said. I looked directly at Aunt Susan, who was standing near the catering tent. She clutched a cocktail napkin to her chest. That is a compelling narrative. It is also entirely fictional. My parents did not purchase this property. They do not own this real estate. They cannot legally gift it to anyone. The yard went completely dead silent. The transition was absolute. The background hum of the pool pump suddenly sounded incredibly loud. The festive atmosphere turned to ice. Chloe and her internet friends slowly lowered their smartphones. The digital recording stopped. The guests who had just cheered for a romantic wedding gift now stared at my family in stunned disbelief. 8 years ago, our parents filed for bankruptcy, I stated. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. They were 60 days away from being physically removed from the premises by the county sheriff. I was 24 years old. I emptied my entire life savings and purchased this house through a negotiated short sale to save them from homelessness. I allowed them to live here rent-free so they could rebuild their lives. Tyler eventually moved into the guest room and never left. For nearly a decade, I have paid the mortgage, the property taxes, and the hazard insurance. I subsidized their lifestyle while they painted the walls and pretended they held the deed. And in 8 years, no one ever said thank you. The curated illusion of the successful, generous suburban dynasty cracked down the middle. The silence in the backyard was heavy and suffocating. My mother realized the catastrophic failure of her trap. The audience she assembled to pressure me was now witnessing her public exposure. Panic seized her features. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and frantic. The script was burning in front of her eyes. She lunged forward. She rushed up the wooden stairs of the deck, her floral dress catching the evening breeze. She reached out with both hands, desperate to grab the microphone from my grip. "Olivia, stop this right now," my mother hissed. Her voice was off microphone, but loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. She turned to the crowd, offering a high-pitched, strained laugh. "She is just joking, everyone." Sibling rivalry. Olivia let me have that device. She clawed at my wrist. I did not wrestle with her. Engaging in a physical tug-of-war diminishes authority. I simply took a firm step backward, out of her reach. I squared my shoulders. I tightened my grip on the plastic cylinder. I looked at her with eyes devoid of any familial warmth. She recognized the look. It was the same look I gave the strip mall notary in my corporate conference room. It was the look of a closed door. She froze mid-step, her hands suspended in the air. I brought the microphone back to my mouth. I addressed the 80 silent witnesses. "Tonight, I am not here to pass a torch," I stated. The words cut through the warm night air like shattered glass. "I am not here to sign a quitclaim deed. I am here to serve an eviction notice." The declaration finalized the destruction of their facade. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Low murmurs erupted among the tables. Uncle Dave, the retired police officer, standing near the front row, crossed his arms over his chest and glared at my father. The truth was out, and the delivery was brutally efficient. I turned to look at my brother. Tyler stood frozen on the deck. His jaw physically dropped. The smug, confident expression he wore just 5 minutes prior had vanished entirely. His champagne glass dangled loosely from his fingers. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his brain. He had spent months convincing himself and his fiancée that he was the rightful heir to a lucrative asset. He structured his entire future around a stolen foundation. Now he was standing on a stage illuminated by golden bulbs, publicly exposed as a 34-year-old dependent facing imminent removal. The social execution was complete. The crowd knew the property belonged to me. But the eviction notice was only the first layer of the reckoning. The guests needed to understand exactly why the leniency had ended. I tucked the microphone under my chin and unsealed the metal clasp of the manila folder. It was time to read the receipts and display the actual paperwork they had demanded I bring. The clock struck 8:30 in the evening. The transition began precisely as my mother had orchestrated. The hired catering staff quietly retreated to the perimeter of the lawn, holding their silver serving trays against their waists. The ambient music playing through the rented speakers faded down to a barely audible hum. Tyler raised his left arm. He held a crystal champagne flute catching the warm glow of the overhead lights. In his right hand, he held a heavy silver spoon. He brought the metal to the glass. He tapped the spoon against the crystal 3 times. The sharp ringing sound cut cleanly through the murmur of 80 conversations. The guests immediately stopped talking. They turned their bodies toward the wooden deck. Tyler stood at the highest elevation in the yard. Chloe stood pressed tightly against his side. She wore a pristine white dress and held her own glass of champagne. Her friends had already migrated to the front of the crowd. They held their smartphones at chest level, with the camera lenses pointed directly at the couple. They were capturing the moment for digital consumption. The Edison bulbs cast a golden light over Tyler, making him look remarkably like the triumphant protagonist of a romantic film. I stood quietly near the edge of the patio, observing the sheer mechanical precision of the illusion. Tyler cleared his throat. He brought a wireless microphone to his mouth. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. His voice echoed across the manicured grass. He paused, allowing the weight of his opening statement to settle over the audience. Chloe and I are starting a brand new chapter together. Getting to this point has not always been an easy journey. We have all faced unpredictable challenges. I have had to overcome a lot of hurdles in my life to finally find my true path. I listened to his confident delivery of the word hurdles. A hurdle implies a rigid external obstacle placed in your way by fate or difficult circumstances. Tyler never faced a hurdle he did not actively construct himself. When he was 29 years old, he convinced my parents to co-sign a lease for a luxury downtown loft he could not afford on a part-time salary. He was evicted 6 months later for hosting destructive parties that severely damaged the hardwood floors. The property management company sued my parents for $10,000 in damages. My father drained his emergency savings account to settle the lawsuit out of court to avoid a public judgment. Tyler called that eviction a learning experience. Now he was standing on a deck I financed, framing his documented history of gross negligence as a heroic journey of personal growth. Tyler shifted his posture. He looked down at the front row of the gathered audience. None of this would be possible without 2 incredible people, he said. He pointed toward my parents. They are absolute saints. They have supported me through every single storm, and tonight they are giving Chloe and me the ultimate blessing. He swept his free hand in a wide, generous arc encompassing the entire property. They are gifting us this amazing house so we can start our lives with a rock-solid foundation, he announced. The crowd let out a collective sound of awe. A few people clapped their hands. It was the exact emotional currency my mother desperately craved. She stood in the center of the front row, wearing her bright floral dress. She beamed with radiant, unfiltered pride. She reached up and dabbed at the corner of her eye with a white cocktail napkin. She was absorbing the admiration of 80 people for a monumental act of generosity she had absolutely no legal capacity to execute. She looked like a wealthy philanthropist receiving an award for a donation she funded with stolen money. Beside her stood my father. He did not look up at his son. He kept his hands shoved deep into his trouser pockets and stared intently at the tips of his leather shoes. My father spent his entire marriage treating passivity as a supreme virtue. 8 years ago, when the bank sent the original foreclosure notices, he simply placed the unopened envelopes in a desk drawer and went fishing. He signed the short sale documents transferring the property to me without reading the clauses. He knew the title belonged exclusively to me. He knew the recent bank loan application had been forged by his wife. Yet he remained completely silent, allowing the theft to proceed, because speaking the truth required confronting the architect of the lie. His perpetual silence was the mortar that held their shared delusion together. Tyler took a slow sip of his champagne. The crowd finished clapping for my parents. Tyler lowered his glass. His eyes scanned the faces in the yard and locked directly onto my position. The spotlight of his attention shifted. "But there is one more person who needs to be recognized tonight," he said into the microphone. His tone became magnanimous. It was the tone of a gracious victor acknowledging a defeated opponent. "My little sister Olivia is here tonight," Tyler announced. He pointed his index finger straight at me. 80 heads swiveled in unison. Suddenly, 160 eyes were fixed on my face. "Olivia has been keeping this place warm for us," Tyler joked. He offered a wide smile, eliciting a ripple of light laughter from his friends and the extended relatives. "She is here tonight to officially pass the torch. Come on up here, Liv. Bring the paperwork and let us make this official." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. The social pressure reached its absolute zenith. This was the exact mechanism my mother had engineered when she planned this gathering. In the unwritten rulebook of polite suburban society, you do not cause a scene at a formal engagement party. You do not humiliate your immediate family in front of their friends and neighbors. You smile and you nod and you swallow your objections to preserve the collective harmony of the group. They constructed this elaborate arena believing I would be too paralyzed by the audience to assert my legal rights. They scripted a scene where I was supposed to look flustered, fold under the heavy, expectant gaze of their peers, and quietly surrender a $750,000 asset. They wanted me to hand over my financial future simply to protect their fragile social standing. I did not flush with embarrassment. My heart rate did not elevate. I experienced the cold, sharp clarity of a commercial underwriter closing a non-compliant account. I looked at Tyler standing on the deck with his outstretched hand. I looked at Chloe holding her phone, ready to record my capitulation. I looked at my mother wearing her triumphant, expectant smile. I reached out and set my glass of sparkling water down on the nearest linen-draped table. The heavy base of the glass made a soft thud against the wood beneath the fabric. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I reached down to my side. I picked up the standard manila folder. The folder contained the 30-day eviction notice terminating their residency. It contained the active real estate listing, proving the house was currently being marketed to buyers across the state. It contained the recorded mechanic lien, proving Tyler had legally compromised the title. It contained the official police incident report detailing my mother and her attempt to commit federal wire fraud. I stepped away from the perimeter. I began to walk through the crowd. The guests parted automatically, creating a narrow, clear pathway toward the wooden deck. The applause continued ringing in my ears, but it sounded distant and entirely irrelevant. I wore my tailored charcoal blazer and maintained a perfectly measured professional stride. I did not look like a younger sister joining a family celebration. I looked like a corporate auditor arriving to liquidate a bankrupt subsidiary. I reached the base of the wooden stairs. Tyler smiled down at me, offering the wireless microphone. He genuinely thought he had won. He believed the paperwork secured in my hand was the quitclaim deed transferring my ownership into his possession. I stepped onto the first wooden plank. The confrontation was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was happening right now under the warm glow of the Edison bulbs, with 80 witnesses watching every movement. I unclasped the metal fastener of the manila folder. The sound was a sharp, metallic click that resonated through the microphone. I folded the heavy cardboard cover back. I extracted the top document. It was the police incident report bearing the bold tracking number printed by the desk sergeant just 24 hours ago. I held the paper up. I did not wave it around. I held it steady so the front row of guests could clearly see the official municipal seal. 3 weeks ago, my mother forged my signature, I said. My voice projected across the lawn, cutting through the humid night air. She walked into a local credit union and attempted to pull a $50,000 equity loan on this house. She committed federal wire fraud to cover the financial damages from Tyler crashing his third rented vehicle into a concrete light pole. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. I looked down at the paper, reading the exact date and time the application was submitted. I then looked back up at the crowd. The bank flagged the application because her forgery triggered an automated security alert. I continued. I filed a formal identity theft report with the police department yesterday morning. The authorities now possess the voided application, and the incident is officially recorded. She did not orchestrate this party to celebrate an engagement. She organized this gathering to force me to sign away my legal title so she could escape the consequences of her own financial crime. My mother took another step backward on the wooden deck. She raised her hands to her mouth. She tried to formulate a sentence, but her vocal cords refused to cooperate. For her entire life, she had navigated conflict by twisting the narrative and playing the victim. She relied on the polite silence of others to maintain her fabrications. But you cannot gaslight a police report. You cannot manipulate a document bearing a municipal tracking number. The empirical evidence stripped her of her primary defense mechanism. I placed the police report at the back of the stack. I revealed the second document. It was the recorded mechanic lien from the county assessor. The state seal was stamped in blue ink near the top margin. 2 weeks ago, I conducted a standard audit of my property profile, I stated. I found a $15,000 mechanic lien filed directly against my residential title. Tyler abandoned 3 broken watercraft at a Tempe repair shop after his jet ski rental business collapsed. He defaulted on the repair invoice. Because he registered his defunct company using my home address, the creditors legally encumbered my asset to recover his debt. I turned my head and looked directly at Tyler. He was visibly trembling. His designer polo shirt clung to his chest. The confident posture of the self-made entrepreneur had completely evaporated. He looked exactly like the terrified 16-year-old boy who used to hide in his bedroom after failing a high school exam, waiting for his parents to buy him a cake and fix his mistakes. Tyler has never created a foundation for anyone, I said, addressing the crowd, but keeping my eyes fixed on my brother. He is a financial parasite. He uses my equity to fund his delusions of success. He has jeopardized the very roof over his head because he is incapable of managing a basic service contract. I lowered the mechanic lien. I pulled the third document from the folder. It was the 30-day notice to quit, prepared by my attorney. I held the heavy bond paper in my left hand. I turned my body to face Chloe. Chloe stood frozen on the deck. Her pristine white dress glowed under the warm overhead bulbs. Her smartphone was still clutched in her hand, but the screen had gone dark. She had entered this relationship believing she had secured a partner with a robust real estate portfolio and a wealthy, supportive family. She was currently processing the realization that her future husband was an unemployed dependent living in a spare bedroom subsidized by the sister he actively bullied. I looked directly into her eyes. I did not feel pity for her. She was a willing participant in a social ambush. She had written the handwritten note demanding I bring the paperwork for a public handover. I was simply honoring her written request. Tyler does not own this house, I said to her. The microphone captured the cold finality in my tone. He has never owned this house. He has not paid a single dime in rent in 8 years. He does not pay the property taxes. He does not pay the hazard insurance. He does not even pay the water bill. He is a tenant at will, residing in my guest room, and as of this morning, his tenancy is officially terminated. I held out the notice to quit. You all have exactly 30 days to clear your belongings and vacate the premises, I announced. My gaze swept across Tyler, my mother, and my father. If the property is not entirely empty by the end of the required statutory period, I will initiate formal eviction proceedings. The county sheriff will arrive and physically remove your items to the curb. The reality of the decree hung in the air. The finality of the legal mandate was absolute. There was no room for debate. There was no margin for negotiation. I had delivered the verdict and the sentence simultaneously. Chloe stared at me. Her eyes darted from my face to the legal documents in my hand, and then finally to Tyler. She looked at the man she had agreed to marry just 30 minutes prior. She saw the panic radiating from his posture. She saw the truth written plainly across his sweating forehead. He did not step forward to defend her. He did not offer a rational explanation. He simply stared at the floorboards of the deck. The muscles in Chloe's hand relaxed, her fingers uncurled. The crystal wine glass slipped from her grip. It fell through the air and struck the composite pavers at the base of the wooden stairs. The sharp sound of the shattering glass echoed across the silent backyard. The fragile crystal fragmented into hundreds of glittering pieces, catching the light of the Edison bulbs as they scattered across the stone. It was the perfect physical manifestation of the moment. The entire theater of lies they had so carefully constructed was now permanently broken. They had built this elaborate stage. They had invited the audience. They had curated the lighting and the catering to execute a flawless social trap. And I had used their exact stage to burn their fiction to the ground. I lowered the microphone. I turned the device off. The sudden absence of amplification made the backyard feel vast and exposed. I handed the microphone back to Tyler. He did not reach out to take it. The plastic cylinder slipped past his rigid arm and hit the deck, rolling away toward the patio furniture. I placed the eviction notice, the police report, and the mechanic lien back into the manila folder. I fastened the metal clasp. The click signaled the end of my presentation. I had delivered the paperwork exactly as requested. I turned my back on the wooden deck. I began walking toward the side gate. David fell into step beside me. The crowd of 80 guests parted silently to let us pass. No one tried to stop me. No one offered a reprimand about family loyalty. The empirical evidence had immunized me against their judgment. But the execution of a parasite does not end quietly. When a manipulative system collapses, the architects of that system do not simply accept defeat. They scramble. They panic. They lash out with whatever crude weapons remain at their disposal. As my hand touched the metal latch of the wooden gate, the frozen silence behind me finally broke. Tyler let out a visceral shout of rage, and the chaotic aftermath of the exposure began to unfold rapidly across the lawn. The sharp sound of the shattering crystal wine glass served as the starting pistol for the chaos. The frozen tableau of the backyard shattered along with it. The 80 guests who had been holding their breath collectively exhaled, releasing a low wave of uncomfortable murmurs. The carefully curated engagement party instantly dissolved into a fractured landscape of confusion and panic. Tyler was the first to break the physical stillness. His survival mechanism engaged. When a parasite is forcefully detached from its host, it does not quietly accept the separation. It thrashes. Tyler gripped the wooden railing of the deck and leaned his upper body forward. His face flushed a deep mottled crimson. The veins in his neck pressed tightly against the collar of his designer polo shirt. "You are a liar," he screamed. His voice was raw and ragged, stripping away any remaining veneer of the suave entrepreneur he had pretended to be just moments before. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "She is making all of this up," he yelled to the crowd, desperately attempting to reclaim his audience. "She has always been jealous of me. She is forging these documents to ruin my life because she cannot stand seeing me happy. Do not listen to a single word she says." I did not raise my voice to counter his shouting. When you possess the truth, volume is entirely unnecessary. Raising your voice only signals to the room that you are participating in a debate. I was not debating my brother. I was delivering a factual, legal ruling. I understood his reaction perfectly. When Tyler was 27, he worked briefly as a shift manager for a regional logistics company. He was terminated after 3 months for systematically stealing high-end inventory from the warehouse floor. Instead of accepting responsibility, he stood in the corporate parking lot and screamed at the regional director, claiming he was being framed by resentful coworkers. Tyler always equated volume with validity. He believed that if he shouted his alternate reality loud enough, he could bend the truth to his will. I ignored his outburst. I turned my attention away from the wooden deck and scanned the front row of the guests. I needed an impartial validator. I needed a figure of authority recognized by the family to independently verify the paperwork in my hand. I locked eyes with Uncle Dave. Dave is my father's older brother. He spent 32 years as a patrol officer and precinct detective for the Phoenix Police Department before retiring to a quiet life in the suburbs. He possessed a fundamental understanding of municipal law, penal codes, and the strict requirements of legal documentation. He was a man who dealt exclusively in facts and possessed zero tolerance for manufactured family drama. He had watched my parents coddle Tyler for decades, but he rarely intervened, preferring to keep his distance from their financial mess. I walked directly toward him. The guest standing near him instinctively took a step back, giving us a wide berth. I unfastened the metal clasp of the manila folder for the second time. I extracted the certified copy of the warranty deed bearing the county recorder watermark. I pulled out the identity theft incident report displaying the bold tracking number from his former precinct. I extended my hand, offering the pages to the retired detective. "Verify the paperwork, Dave," I said. My tone was entirely conversational. Dave did not hesitate. He reached into the breast pocket of his short-sleeved button-down shirt and retrieved a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. He unfolded the frames and slid them onto his face. He took the documents from my hand. The entire backyard watched him. The crowd treated him like a jury foreman tasked with delivering the final verdict. Tyler stopped screaming. The silence returned, hanging heavily in the humid night air. Dave examined the warranty deed first. His eyes tracked across the legal description, the parcel number, and the singular name listed as the grantee. He flipped to the second page to check the official seal of Maricopa County. He then moved the deed to the back and focused on the police incident report. He recognized the formatting immediately. He read the narrative section detailing the forged signature at the credit union. He checked the timestamp and the badge number of the reporting sergeant. He lowered the papers. He took off his reading glasses and let them dangle from his fingers. His face was a mask of pure disgust. He did not look at me. He did not look at Tyler. He turned his head slowly and locked his gaze onto my father. "Thomas," he said. His voice was gravelly and low, but it carried a profound weight. "You let your wife commit federal wire fraud against your own daughter to protect a boy who refuses to work?" My father physically shrank. His shoulders rounded and his chin dropped toward his chest. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. He could not formulate a single word of defense. He had spent his entire life hoping his passive compliance would shield him from consequence. Tonight, his silence was officially indicted as complicity. Dave shook his head slowly. "This is a disgrace, Thomas. You are a disgrace." He handed the documents back to me. The validation was absolute. No one in that yard could dismiss my claims as sibling jealousy anymore. The empirical data had been confirmed by a trusted veteran of law enforcement. My mother witnessed the exchange. She watched her brother-in-law confirm the validity of her crime to the entire neighborhood. She realized her anger had failed. She recognized her authority had evaporated. She had one final mechanism remaining in her psychological arsenal. She deployed her ultimate weapon: victimhood. The physiological shift was instantaneous. The rigid panic in her posture melted away. Her knees intentionally buckled. She let out a loud, ragged gasp and collapsed into a woven wicker patio chair positioned near the base of the deck. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. Her weeping was theatrical and loud. It was designed to drown out the logic in the room and replace it with raw, emotional guilt. "How could you do this to your family?" she wailed. Her voice trembled, shaking with manufactured heartbreak. We are your blood, Olivia. How can you throw your own mother and brother out into the street? You are destroying us. When I was 19 years old, my mother used this exact weeping technique on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table and sobbed until her eyes were swollen. She used that performance to guilt me into surrendering my college study abroad savings to pay the legal fees for Tyler after his first driving under the influence charge. Back then, her tears felt like a heavy anchor pulling me underwater. I gave her the money because I believed it was my fundamental duty to stop her pain. I was no longer 19. I had spent a decade evaluating the cold, hard numbers of corporate liability. I knew the difference between genuine grief and a manipulative performance. Genuine grief is a reaction to a sudden tragic loss. My mother was not grieving. She was throwing a tantrum because her ATM machine had finally closed its doors. I stood over her. I looked down at her shaking shoulders. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I didn't do anything to my family, I said. My voice was as flat and unyielding as a concrete slab. I am simply protecting my asset from terrible tenants. The blunt, clinical nature of my response severed the final string of her emotional leverage. I categorized her not as a mother, but as a liability. I categorized Tyler not as a brother, but as a tenant. The boundary was drawn in permanent ink. The social collapse of the party accelerated rapidly. The guests realized there was no elegant way to recover the evening. Chloe's friends, the digital influencers who arrived seeking aesthetic content for their online profiles, were the first to initiate the exodus. They had no interest in being adjacent to a documented financial crime. They quietly gathered their designer handbags. They did not say goodbye to Tyler. They did not offer condolences to Chloe. They simply turned their backs and began a swift, silent march toward the wooden side gate. Other guests followed their lead. Extended relatives, neighbors, and casual acquaintances set their half-empty champagne flutes down on the nearest available surfaces. The catering staff, recognizing the event was effectively terminated, stopped circulating the appetizer trays and began quietly packing their equipment into stainless steel transport boxes. I looked at Chloe one last time. She was still standing on the deck, staring at the shattered remains of her crystal wine glass. She looked entirely hollowed out. She had chased an illusion of wealth and arrived at the epicenter of a legal eviction. She slowly stepped away from Tyler, putting physical distance between herself and the man she had promised to marry. I turned on my heel. I did not wait to watch the final guests depart. I did not need to witness the physical dismantling of the catering tent. The objective was completed. David fell into step beside me. We walked across the lawn, our shoes moving silently over the manicured grass. We passed through the heavy wooden gate and stepped out onto the dark pavement of Oak Street. The ambient heat of the desert night felt remarkably clean compared to the suffocating atmosphere of the backyard. We walked back to the car in a comfortable silence. The confrontation was over, but the war was not entirely finished. Serving a 30-day notice to quit is merely the opening sequence of a legal removal. Desperate people facing the loss of their primary shelter do not pack their boxes and leave quietly. They scramble. They hire cheap representation. They attempt to bend the legal system the same way they bent their family dynamic. They had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises, and I knew they would use every single hour of that countdown to try and break my resolve. The judicial system operates on a rigid timeline. 5 calendar days equate to exactly 120 hours. The countdown began the moment the judge struck his gavel on the sounding block. My parents and Tyler spent those 120 hours experiencing the severe friction of reality. They could no longer rely on manipulation to secure their shelter. They had to navigate the open market with decimated credit scores and zero liquid savings. They scrambled to find housing. The luxury rental market in Scottsdale automatically rejected their applications. Tyler possessed no verifiable income. My father relied on a fixed monthly pension. My mother held a documented history of recent fraudulent activity linked to her public profile. They were forced to secure a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Mesa. The complex was located next to a noisy commercial transit route. Because they lacked prime financial credentials, the property manager required them to pay the first month, the last month, and a double security deposit up front. They drained whatever meager cash reserves they possessed just to acquire the keys. Tyler, a 34-year-old man who spent the last 8 years sleeping in a spacious guest room and planning imaginary renovations, was now relegated to sharing a thin drywall partition with his aging parents. The golden child was finally experiencing the genuine cost of his own gravity. David and I arrived at the Scottsdale property at 9 a.m. on the final day. The desert sun was already casting sharp, angular shadows across the front lawn. A dented yellow moving truck sat parked in the driveway. The loading ramp was extended, resting on the hot concrete. I stepped out of my vehicle. I held a brass key in my right hand. I did not walk toward the moving truck. I walked directly to the front door. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and pushed it open. The interior of the house was entirely stripped. The sudden absence of furniture and personal belongings created a hollow, resonant, acoustic environment. Every footstep echoed off the hardwood floors. I walked through the foyer and entered the living room. The walls bore pale, rectangular outlines where my mother used to hang her gallery of framed family portraits. Those photographs meticulously documented every milestone Tyler ever achieved, while deliberately excluding my presence. The faded paint served as a physical map of their selective memory. Now the walls were just bare drywall, waiting for a fresh coat of primer. I moved into the kitchen. I ran my hand along the edge of the quartz countertop. This was the exact space Tyler loudly proclaimed he intended to gut and rebuild. He wanted to demolish premium materials funded by my underwriting salary to construct a fantasy kitchen for a woman who left him the moment she saw his bank statement. The cabinetry remained pristine. The stainless steel appliances gleamed in the morning light. The structure outlasted the parasite. David followed me down the hallway. We stepped into the guest bedroom. It was the room Tyler occupied for nearly a decade. Deep, circular indentations marked the carpet where his heavy oak bed frame used to rest. The air in the room carried a faint, lingering scent of cheap cologne and stagnant complacency. He lived in this room under the assumption that the world owed him a perpetual safety net. He woke up every afternoon believing his mere existence justified the financial drain he placed on everyone around him. I completed the interior inspection. There was no severe structural damage. They had packed their items in a frantic rush, but they lacked the energy to vandalize the property. We walked out through the back patio doors. I stood on the composite deck. The strings of warm Edison bulbs were gone. The white linen cocktail tables were a distant memory. The backyard was just a quiet square of manicured grass. I looked down at the stone pavers near the base of the wooden stairs. A faint scratch marred the surface, marking the exact location where Chloe dropped her crystal wine glass. The theater was permanently closed. I turned around and walked back through the house. I exited through the front door. David stepped out behind me. My parents were standing on the concrete porch. Tyler was already sitting inside the cab of the yellow moving truck. He stared straight ahead through the dirty windshield. He refused to turn his head. He lacked the basic courage to make eye contact with the sister who just legally dismantled his entire life. My mother stood near the edge of the front step. She wore a faded gray blouse and flat shoes. She held a medium-sized cardboard box sealed with clear packing tape. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, severe knot. The radiant, artificial smile she weaponized at the engagement party was gone. The dignified suffering she attempted to project in the courtroom had evaporated. She looked exhausted. She looked like a woman who finally ran out of scripts to read. She tightened her grip on the cardboard box. Her knuckles turned white. She stared at me with a gaze composed of pure, concentrated resentment. "You destroyed this family, Olivia," she hissed. Her voice was low and trembling. It was the last desperate strike of a defeated architect. She wanted to inflict a final psychological wound. She needed me to carry the guilt of their displacement. She needed me to believe I was the villain in her narrative. I stood on the threshold of my property. I inserted the brass key into the deadbolt. I turned the metal cylinder. The heavy steel lock engaged with a loud, definitive click. I pulled the key out and dropped it into my blazer pocket. I turned to face her. I did not sigh. I did not offer a defensive explanation. My heart rate remained steady. My vocal delivery was devoid of any trace of emotion. "No, Mom," I said. "I just stopped paying the premiums on your mistakes." The sentence was a precise calculation. In the insurance industry, a premium is the ongoing price you pay to maintain coverage against a recognized hazard. For 32 years, I was the designated policyholder for their catastrophic failures. I funded the payouts. I absorbed the losses. I shielded them from the natural consequences of their own reckless behavior. Terminating a policy does not cause the disaster. It simply forces the responsible party to finally pay out of their own pocket. My mother opened her mouth to reply, but no sound emerged. The cold, unvarnished truth of the metaphor paralyzed her. She turned away, holding her taped box, and walked slowly down the driveway toward the rented truck. My father remained standing on the porch. He was the man who spent 3 decades choosing the path of least resistance. He watched his wife forge documents. He watched his son drain resources. He watched his daughter eat dinner alone in a dark kitchen. He treated his silence as a neutral position, failing to understand that in the presence of exploitation, silence is a formal endorsement. He looked at me. His eyes were watering. The deep lines around his mouth twitched. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I am sorry, Liv," he said. His voice was fragile. It was the first time he had spoken directly to me since the night of the backyard party. It was the first time he offered an apology in my entire life. I looked at him. I evaluated the phrase. An apology is a verbal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But an apology delivered after a judge forces you to vacate a premises is not an act of accountability. It is an act of surrender. An overdue apology does not alter history. It does not refund $142,000 in mortgage payments. It does not erase a forged bank application. It is merely a collection of words offered by a man who realized he bet his entire future on the wrong child. I did not tell him I forgave him. Forgiveness implies a restoration of trust, and I had zero intention of ever trusting him again. I gave him a single, curt nod. It was an acknowledgement that I heard his words, nothing more, nothing less. I turned on my heel. I walked down the paved walkway toward my own vehicle. David walked beside me. We opened the doors and settled into the leather seats. I started the engine. The air conditioning engaged immediately, pushing a wave of cool air through the cabin. I shifted the transmission into drive. I pulled away from the curb. I did not look out the side window as I passed the yellow moving truck. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead on the road. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. I watched the figures of my parents shrinking in the reflected glass. My mother was struggling to lift the cardboard box into the back of the rental truck. My father was standing on the hot concrete shoulders, slumped, offering no assistance. Tyler remained hidden behind the dirty windshield. The physical distance between us increased with every rotation of the tires. They grew smaller and smaller until they were nothing more than a blur of shapes fading into the desert heat haze. The image in the mirror marked the permanent termination of a toxic system. The emotional extraction was complete. The physical asset was secured. But the financial ledger was not perfectly balanced yet. My property was vacant, but the title still bore a $15,000 scar, courtesy of a failed jet ski business. I had an active real estate listing, generating aggressive offers across the state. I was returning to my quiet home in Sedona to finalize the closing procedures. The final accounting was due. I was about to execute a maneuver that would clear the lien, sell the ground they used to stand on, and redirect their stolen equity into a future they could never touch. 6 months passed since the morning the yellow moving truck drove away from the Scottsdale property. The desert winter arrived, bringing crisp air and clear skies across the valley. I no longer lived in the bustling center of Phoenix. David and I purchased a mid-century modern home tucked into the red rock formations of Sedona. The architecture featured clean lines, flat planes, and floor-to-ceiling glass panels that integrated the interior space with the natural landscape. The environment was entirely silent. There were no rented speakers playing loud music. There were no fabricated social gatherings. There was only the quiet hum of a well-managed life. Today marked the official conclusion of the asset extraction. At 10 in the morning, my laptop screen illuminated with an incoming message from the local title company. The subject line indicated the final escrow disbursement was complete. Sarah, my residential broker, executed her duties flawlessly. The coming soon status on the listing generated a bidding war within 48 hours of the eviction. We secured a buyer willing to waive all contingencies and purchase the property entirely in cash. The final sale price recorded on the closing documents was $850,000. I opened the attached settlement statement and reviewed the mathematics. The title officer deducted the standard broker commissions, the municipal transfer fees, and the remaining principal balance of my original mortgage. A substantial sum of pure equity remained. The title company authorized a direct wire transfer. I logged into my banking portal and watched the net proceeds populate in my checking account. The numbers on the screen represented the exact value my mother tried to steal using a forged signature. It was the exact wealth Tyler believed he could acquire simply by standing on a composite deck and making a speech. The money was now legally unassailable, resting securely behind encrypted firewalls under my exclusive control. But a real estate transaction requires a clean title to proceed. I could not transfer the deed to the new buyer while the $15,000 mechanic lien remained attached to the parcel. I was forced to satisfy the debt with the Tempe Marine Shop during the escrow process to clear the encumbrance. I paid the penalty, but I did not absorb the loss. When a property owner is forced to satisfy a debt incurred by a third party to clear a title, the owner gains the legal right of subrogation. I retained Marcus to file a civil lawsuit against Tyler in the Maricopa County Justice Court for the exact amount of the lien plus all associated legal fees. Tyler was served with the civil summons at his cramped apartment in Mesa. He responded with his standard strategy. He ignored the problem. He failed to appear at the scheduled hearing, assuming the legal system would eventually grow tired and look the other way, just like our parents always did. The judicial branch does not experience fatigue. The magistrate issued a default judgment in my favor for $18,400. Securing a judgment is merely a piece of paper. Collecting the funds requires mechanism. I handed the court order to a specialized collection attorney who investigates employment records through state tax databases. My phone vibrated on the glass desk. A new email arrived from the collection attorney. I clicked the notification and read the status update. Tyler finally secured employment. He was working as a shift associate at a regional home improvement warehouse. He was earning an hourly wage, scanning inventory, and operating a forklift. He was attempting to quietly rebuild his finances after Chloe terminated their engagement and his social circle abandoned him. The attorney successfully located his employer and filed a writ of garnishment. Under Arizona state law, a creditor holding a valid judgment can compel an employer to withhold 25% of a debtor's non-exempt disposable earnings. The employer has no choice in the matter. The Human Resources Department is legally mandated to intercept the funds before the paycheck is ever issued. If the company refuses to comply, the corporation itself becomes liable for the debt. I read the attached PDF copy of the garnishment order. The state officially commanded the warehouse payroll division to deduct a quarter of Tyler's wages every 2 weeks and route the money directly into a trust account managed by my attorney. Tyler could not talk his way out of a corporate payroll system. He could not cry to a warehouse manager and expect them to violate a judicial mandate. My parents could not shield him from the math. Every time he clocked in for a shift, a portion of his physical labor was automatically diverted to repay the sister he tried to defraud. The man who spent nearly a decade living rent-free, believing he was entitled to my assets, was now legally bound to produce capital for me. The parasite was placed on a mandatory installment plan. I closed the email. A profound sense of order settled over the room. The scales were officially balanced. I turned my attention back to my primary monitor. I navigated to the portal of a major national brokerage firm. I clicked the interface to establish a new account. The prompt asked me to select the specific financial instrument. I chose the Arizona Family College Savings Program, identifying it as a 529 plan. A 529 plan is a tax-advantaged investment vehicle designed exclusively to encourage saving for future education costs. The capital placed inside the trust grows tax-free, and the distributions remain entirely shielded from federal taxation as long as they are utilized for qualified academic expenses. It is a highly regulated, irrevocable commitment to the future. The portal asked for the name of the beneficiary. I typed the name, Clara. David walked into the home office holding 2 cups of green tea. He set one mug near my keyboard. He stepped behind my chair and rested his hands gently on my shoulders. He looked at the monitor. He saw the beneficiary designation. I was currently 16 weeks pregnant. We received the confirmation from the medical clinic 3 days ago. We were expecting a daughter. I moved the cursor to the funding section of the application. I initiated a transfer drawing directly from the massive pool of liquid equity generated by the sale of the Scottsdale house. I deposited an initial contribution that would guarantee Clara could attend any university she desired without ever signing a student loan document. My mother organized an engagement party to provide Tyler with a foundation to build on. She attempted to secure that foundation using theft, manipulation, and social pressure. Her methodology failed because it relied entirely on illusion. I was building a genuine foundation for my daughter using empirical data, legally binding contracts, and compound interest. Clara would grow up in a house where achievements were earned, not fabricated. She would never watch her parents purchase a sheet cake to celebrate a failure. She would never be asked to subsidize the incompetence of a sibling to keep the peace. She would never know the people who lived in that cramped apartment in Mesa. The generational cycle of exploitation was officially severed. I clicked the final submission button. The screen flashed a green confirmation code. The trust was active. The equity was locked. The future was secured. I leaned back against David. I picked up my mug of tea. The warmth radiated through the ceramic into my palms. I looked out the expansive window at the red rock formations catching the afternoon light. I thought about a specific Tuesday 16 years ago. I thought about a 16-year-old girl holding a temporary paper driver license, walking into an empty kitchen. I remembered the silence of the dark house while her parents sat in a restaurant, comforting a brother who refused to study for a basic exam. I did not cry that evening standing at the kitchen counter. I ate my sandwich and processed the reality of my environment. I realized very early that nobody was coming to rescue me. I realized my family viewed my competence as an asset they could harvest, and my independence as a threat they needed to manage. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for a toxic family to suddenly develop a conscience. They write long letters, hoping to inspire guilt. They scream during holiday dinners, begging to be understood. They believe emotional appeals will eventually break through the dysfunction. Emotions do not change the architecture of a failing system. Tears do not alter the trajectory of a parasite. You do not win your life back by crying. You win your life back by auditing the ledger, identifying the liability, and placing absolute, unquestionable faith in the power of paperwork. I sit in the quiet of my Sedona home, watching the desert sun dip below the red rock formations. There are no uninvited guests here, no forged documents sitting on conference tables, no manufactured crises waiting to be subsidized. There is only the steady, predictable rhythm of a life I engineered, protected by the very boundaries my family attempted to destroy. I closed the ledger on a failing investment and transferred the remaining capital into a secure future for my daughter. If you are listening to this and currently trapped inside a system designed to drain your resources, understand that you possess the right to resign from the role they assigned you. Based on my own audit, here are the 5 lessons I finalized. First, paperwork will always outlast emotions. Tears, guilt trips, and public pressure evaporate the moment the audience leaves. A recorded deed, an eviction notice, and a police report do not. When dealing with manipulative people, stop arguing. Stop trying to make them understand. Start documenting the facts. Second, biology is not a blank check. Sharing a bloodline does not obligate you to finance someone else's continuous incompetence. You are entirely within your rights to protect your net worth from the people who share your last name. Third, passive enablers are just as dangerous as active aggressors. My father's 3 decades of silence was never neutral. It was the structural support that allowed the fraud to occur. Do not wait for the quiet parent to finally stand up and defend you. They will always choose the path of least resistance. Fourth, expect the smear campaign and ignore it. When a parasite loses access to the host, it thrashes. They will rewrite history and play the victim to anyone willing to listen. Let them talk. The people who value logic will look at the receipts, and the rest will eventually scatter. Fifth, you do not need an apology to close the account. Waiting for a toxic family to suddenly develop self-awareness is a massive waste of time. True closure is not a confession they hand to you. It is a permanent perimeter you build and enforce yourself. My daughter will never know the weight of that Scottsdale guest room or the suffocating pressure of a backyard ambush. She will simply know stability. If my journey resonated with your own reality, or if you are currently standing in a dark kitchen realizing it is time to gather your paperwork and walk away, let me know in the comments. Which of these 5 data points hits closest to home for your specific situation? Before you leave, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories. We share these blueprints not to dwell on the damage, but to map out the reconstruction. Trust your data, hold your perimeter, and I will see you in the next story.